Now, the reason I'm talking about this is that I have a lot of people who kind of fall upon my content that might get the idea that I'm either anti church or anti large institution or anti organization at a large scale. And that's really not the case. I would say what I am for is seeing people brought to maturity, to grow up, to come from being born again to being full-grown adults who are reaching the standard of maturity and trust and love that's set by the Messiah. That's the goal. That's what we should be trying to accomplish in all of our churches, is to bring our believers, the people that are part of our organization, to maturity. And I think that can be done in part through programs, but it also needs an equal balance of life on life discipleship by people who have been raised up, which in many cases means that some of these organizations are probably going to have to scale down until their leadership can scale up to meet the actual demand that's required to accomplish this task. And I think more importantly, they're going to have to make that the priority. They're going to have to recognize that having 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, whatever amount of people in an auditorium listening to a message is not the measure of success. The measure of success is not how many people you have in your organization. It's not how many people you have returning to your programs. It's not even how many homeless people you've helped or how much money you've given away to charitable organizations. Right? At that point, you just become a funnel for the believers that are part of your organization. You essentially just become a harvesting mechanism to transfer their wealth to people who are in need. And I don't think that's what our aim should be, right? I think it's wonderful that the church helps the poor and that we improve the quality of our communities around us. And I think we should absolutely do those things, but we shouldn't do it at the expense of the people who are actually part of our own families. I think we've got to focus our resources, our time, and our energy on raising the health of the internal organization, the people who are committed to our own bodies, seeing each and every one of them brought all the way to the fullness of maturity and making that the primary priority. And then everything else can still happen. It's not that we need to stop doing everything else. It's just simply that we need to write our priorities. Anyway, I just wanted to pause and talk about this for a minute because, again, I know it's so easy to look at the big thing and say, the reason this is bad is because it's big, right? And we need to go back to small. But the reality is that small things, when they're done well, tend to grow. And so it is unavoidable. You cannot plant a seed of faith and not expect it to grow. And so when you plant a seed of faith, the likelihood that at some point in time you will have to face the problem of scaling up the organization, that is a likely scenario. And I think we've got to get out of this mentality that small is good and big is bad. And we need to recognize the fact that that these things are going to grow. And we've got to find better ways, I think, to navigate that growth without losing the culture and the focus and the point, which is individuals being brought to maturity within our own families, right? I think we've got to figure out how to scale these things without losing the plot. And that begins by those of us who recognize that the plot has been lost, not attacking the people who are struggling with this problem of scale, but rather recognizing the difficulty that comes with trying to do this and trying to figure out how we can help to improve the situation. And I want to be very clear. I'm not suggesting that we should ignore the people that are very clearly abusing the situation, right? Mike Winger calls a lot of these types of things out, and I think that's very important, right? So I'm not in any way suggesting that we ignore the obvious abuses. I'm just saying that we need to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And we need to stop with this mentality that small is good and big is bad. That is it's a false binary, and it's a very small-minded way of thinking about this. And truthfully, it's a very immature way of thinking about things. And I'm speaking of myself. I was that person when I was in my 20s. And it wasn't until I went through the process of trying to scale a business and dealing with all of the problems of we were doing something amazing and people wanted to participate, and we tried to grow to meet the demand. And I learned firsthand how difficult it is to scale leadership, how difficult it is to navigate all of the messiness that comes with adding more people to a situation. And so much more with the gospel, because you don't want to turn people away. When people are drawn to the light, you don't want to turn them away and say, sorry, we don't have good enough leadership here to support you. You got to go somewhere else, right? And so, as a result of that, you find yourself kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, and it's difficult. And the truth is, a lot of the pastors and people, I think, that are involved in these situations, I think a lot of them are getting thrust into environments and circumstances that they're just not prepared for. They got into the situation loving Jesus, wanting to share the gospel, wanting to, just wanting to preach, to do the thing that God called them to do. And as a result of the mighty work of God, they found themselves in a situation trying to do things that were well outside of both their experience and their skill set. And that's what happens when you try to grow things and you're not ready for it. It's a mess, and I watch it happen in business all the time. I can't tell you how many businesses I've seen that they try to scale up and they collapse and fail miserably. But no one ever hears about those things because when they scale up and fail, that's expected in a business. But people don't expect churches to behave that way. They expect churches to just magically know how to grow to 1,000 people or 5,000 people without having any kinds of problems or moral failures or anything. They're just supposed to perfectly execute this thing that everyone else in the world, you're talking, 4 out of 5 small businesses fail? So it's like, how is it that we're expecting Christians, people who went into the thing not even expecting to grow to the point where they had these problems, to be able to just perfectly solve them on their first go? I think we need a lot more grace. And I think we need, as those who are participating in these organizations, I think we need a lot more people to recognize the burden that it is and the difficulty that the people who are trying to manage and navigate this process, the real difficulty that they're dealing with. And I would say we just need more people to step up. Again, those of you who were like me, who recognize the problem, don't be part of the problem, be part of the solution. Because the truth is, and I can't, I'm speaking on this anecdotally, right? Because I haven't done the research or looked at the data, but I have a feeling that the vast majority of the pastors out there that are running these churches, regardless of size, I would bet the vast majority are truly God-fearing people who love the Lord, who aren't greedy, who aren't trying to get rich off the backs of their followers, who aren't trying to make a name for themselves, who really genuinely just want to share the gospel and want to impact people. I think the vast majority are probably in that camp, and I promise you they are burning out and they are struggling because the weight of managing organizations is so hard. And if you haven't done it, you really do not have a grid or a proxy to appreciate the level of difficulty that comes with scaling anything beyond 500, much less 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. It's so hard, guys. And it brings so many problems that you cannot even begin to imagine. And so for every corrupt, evangelical, whatever, right, corrupt pastor that's out there, I would say there's probably 100 that are truly God-fearing and love the Lord. And I think it's just so important that again, those of you who see the problems, be part of the solution. Don't be part of the problem.